often time when directors don't talk to you, you're in on the good highway, if you will, of your performance. You're on a good highway. If you start getting too much,
There's a specific kind of career path in Hollywood that almost no one tracks correctly. The actor turns in performance after performance that critics openly describe as one of the best in the film. He racks up Oscar nominations, Golden Globe nominations, NAACP Image Awards, an Independent Spirit Award, a National Board of Review win, and roles in some of the highest-grossing movies ever made. And then, 30 years into doing all of that, he sits down for an interview and tells you he's still struggling to make a living.
I'm still struggling trying to make a living.
You assume he must be exaggerating. He isn't. He's just been doing this for so long, in so many films you've definitely seen, that the industry stopped registering him as an event and started treating him as scenery. I love this category of actor, because once you start paying attention to the careers Hollywood actively undercredits, you realize how much of the heavy lifting on prestige dramas is being done by performers who never get the lead chair. Djimon Hounsou is the textbook example. He was born in Cotonou, Benin, moved to France at the age of 13 with his older brother, dropped out of school, ended up homeless on the streets of Paris, sleeping under bridges and rummaging through trash for food, and then got plucked off the street by Thierry Mugler to become one of the most in-demand male models in Europe. And that's the prologue. The actual career hasn't even started yet. He moved to the US in 1990, did music videos for Madonna, Janet Jackson, Paula Abdul, and Tina Turner, and then sat in small TV roles and unnoticed films for almost 7 years before Steven Spielberg pulled his audition tape out of a stack of over 150 candidates and changed his life. A lot of you have been asking me to do an underrated counterpart to the villain video, and Hounsou is the obvious place to start because his career is almost a thesis statement on what underrated actually means. It doesn't mean unknown. It doesn't mean unloved. It means systemically undervalued by the same industry that keeps casting him because no one else can do what he does. So let's get into it.
African violet, I can't tell you how difficult that was to come by.
Starting with the role that should have made him a leading man overnight and somehow didn't. Amistad is a Steven Spielberg film from 1997 about the real-life uprising aboard the Spanish slave ship La Amistad in 1839, a mutiny led by a Mende man named Sengbe Pie, who the Americans renamed Joseph Cinque. The film stars Anthony Hopkins as former President John Quincy Adams, Morgan Freeman as the abolitionist Theodore Jodson, Matthew McConaughey as the property lawyer Roger Baldwin, and a then-unknown Chiwetel Ejiofor as the translator. That is one of the most stacked ensembles Spielberg has ever assembled, and the man at the center of it had basically no acting career to point to. According to Wikipedia's production notes, Spielberg had already turned down Cuba Gooding Jr., who passed on the role and later regretted it, plus Will Smith, Seal, and Dustin Hoffman, who was offered a different part and also declined. He held auditions in London, Paris, and Sierra Leone, considered over 150 actors, and was ready to delay production by up to 2 years if he didn't find the right person. Hounsou's audition tape was the one that ended the search, and the story behind it is genuinely funny because Hounsou recently told a Deadline keynote at Afro Berlin that the casting director surprised the actors by demanding they perform the scene in an African language without telling them in advance. "I was so frustrated that I began the audition by cussing her out in my language," Hounsou said. "They rolled with it. He got the part." Spielberg's own read on why is the most striking thing in any interview about the film. Speaking to American Visions, as cited by Encyclopedia.com, Spielberg said, "Djimon just has an enduring quality, a real sense of destiny. He's extremely powerful and charismatic and charming. I saw him, and he was just how I imagined Cinque to look and sound. He was Cinque at first sight." That's the director of E.T. and Schindler's List talking about a guy who 2 years earlier was modeling Gap jeans and doing background work on TV shows. What Hounsou does in this movie is absolutely the kind of thing that gets you a Best Actor Oscar in any other year, and yet he ended up with only a Golden Globe nomination because the Academy somehow couldn't find a slot for him. He plays Cinque for almost the entire first act in Mende, a Sierra Leonean language he learned in 10 days. And the scenes on the ship and in the prison have him communicating fear, rage, grief, and authority entirely through expression and physical bearing because the audience speaks none of his language, and most of his fellow captives don't either. According to Wikipedia, Hounsou was so emotionally crushed by being chained in real shackles on the first day of filming that he almost quit. And you can feel that residue in every frame because Sinkay isn't performing trauma, he's carrying it. The film slowly hands him fragments of English, and the moment that defines the entire performance is when he interrupts the courtroom proceedings with a phrase that's intentionally broken because Mende is his only fluent language.
Give us free.
He repeats it.
Give us free.
He pounds the table. The room freezes. And it's one of the only moments in mainstream 90s cinema where the camera trusts an actor to carry the emotional climax of a Spielberg picture using a phrase that's grammatically wrong on purpose. Roger Ebert wrote in his original review that Djimon Hounsou's performance depends largely on his screen presence, which is formidable. And the New York Times' Janet Maslin, quoted at famoustrials.com, said Spielberg's choice could only be called brilliant because it is his spirit, more than his physique, that fulfills the role. The detail from production that broke me when I first read it is the scene where Sinkay meets John Quincy Adams in the greenhouse for the first time. It's a quiet exchange between a man kidnapped from his home and a former president who is the only person in the room with the political weight to actually free him. And according to Wikipedia's production notes, both Hounsou and Hopkins struggled through take after take, trying not to cry, with Spielberg having to keep telling them to hold the tears back because the scene wasn't supposed to land that way yet. Hopkins reportedly broke down and wept the moment they finished. The line Adams gives him in that conversation is the thesis statement of the entire film, and Hopkins delivers it directly to Hounsou.
Whoever tells the best story wins.
What Hounsou does in response is the part Hopkins later said wrecked him, because Sinkay has been listening to a translator who can barely keep up, and his answer has to land through pure expression. He looks at Adams and quietly says, in Mende,
I will reach back and draw them into me. And they must come. For at this moment I am the whole reason they have existed at all.
That's not Hounsou playing along with a great actor. That's Hounsou pulling Anthony Hopkins out of his own technical control. And the industry's response to a debut performance with that much gravity was a Golden Globe nomination, no Oscar nod, and a quiet conversation Hounsou himself remembers very precisely. He told The Guardian that years later, studio executives would say things like, "Wow, we felt like you just got off the boat and then went back. We didn't know you were here as a true actor." That's the start of the underrated story right there. The performance was so complete that nobody recognized the performer.
Don't die. They'll feed you to the lions. They're worth more than we are.
3 years after Amistad, Ridley Scott cast Hounsou as Juba in Gladiator, and this is the role most people first put a name to, even if they don't actually remember the name. The film is built around Russell Crowe's Maximus, a Roman general betrayed by Joaquin Phoenix's Commodus, sold into slavery, and forced to fight his way back to Rome through the gladiatorial circuit. The supporting cast around Crowe is loaded with weight, with Oliver Reed as the gladiator trainer Proximo in his final screen performance, Richard Harris as Marcus Aurelius, Connie Nielsen as Lucilla, and Derek Jacobi as Senator Gracchus. And then there's Juba, a Numidian slave who treats Maximus's wounds in the early act and slowly becomes his closest confidant in the arena. What Hounsou does with Juba is genuinely one of the smartest pieces of supporting work in any of Ridley Scott's epics, because the role on paper is mostly reactive. Juba doesn't have a revenge arc, he doesn't have a romance, he doesn't have a political subplot. His entire job in the script is to be the human anchor that keeps Maximus tethered to something other than his own grief. Hounsou plays him with this constant, almost paternal stillness, listening more than he speaks, waiting for the right moment to land a line that recalibrates the entire emotional weight of the scene. The first scene that signals what Hounsou is doing with the part is the moment they walk into the Colosseum and Juba sees the structure for the very first time. He's a man who comes from a desert tribe, who has just been chained, beaten, and dragged into the literal beating heart of an empire built to entertain itself with death. And his only line is,
Have you ever seen anything like that before? I didn't know men could build such things.
Hounsou plays it with no anger, no fear, just genuine awe at the cruelty of human ambition. and the line lands harder than 3 pages of dialogue would have because of how quietly he says it. The same restraint anchors the campfire conversation that becomes the moral spine of the entire movie. Maximus is staring at the figurines of his murdered wife and son. Juba asks him about the afterlife.
Family in the afterlife.
Oh, yes.
What do you say to them?
And what could have been a generic scene about grief becomes the emotional architecture for the rest of the film because of how Hounsou plays the listener. That phrase gets weaponized at the very end of the movie when Maximus dies in the arena, and Hounsou returns to it in the closing shot, kneeling in the sand of the Colosseum to bury those same figurines. The strange thing about that final scene is that Hounsou has confirmed in interviews that it wasn't in the original script. He told Screen Rant that that scene was not written, and that the ending was reshaped after Oliver Reed's death during production-forced rewrites, with Scott capturing that closing moment almost on the fly. The line everyone quotes from a film with a $100 million budget and a Best Picture Oscar was effectively built under duress.
I will see you again, but not yet.
That's the last line of one of the most successful films of the 2000s, and it belongs to the supporting actor. Russell Crowe took home the Best Actor Oscar, and rightfully so, but the emotional payoff of his entire performance is being delivered, after his death, by a Beninese former model who 4 years earlier was learning Mende from a dialect coach in 10 days. That's the second flag for the underrated thesis. The lead won the Oscar. The supporting actor was carrying the closure.
Looks like a haunted house.
It is haunted, but it's not scary.
In America is where the conversation about Hounsou's range stops being a conversation and starts being an indictment of how Hollywood was casting him. The film is a 2003 Jim Sheridan drama, semi-autobiographical, co-written by Sheridan with his daughters Naomi and Kirsten, about an Irish immigrant family arriving in New York in the early 80s and trying to grieve the death of their young son while clawing their way through a Hell's Kitchen tenement. Paddy Considine plays the father, Samantha Morton plays the mother, and the family slowly befriends the man who lives downstairs in the same building, an artist named Mateo, who is dying of AIDS. That artist is played by Hounsou, and the performance is so different from anything he had done up to that point that it should have rewritten his career trajectory permanently. Mateo enters the movie as a shouting, pounding, terrifying presence behind a closed door. The little girls in the family hear him through the walls, see his name on the door, and convince themselves he might be a monster. That's the setup Sheridan gives Hounsou to play with, and the choice he makes with it is to flip every assumption the audience has about him as an actor. Up until 2003, Hounsou had been cast almost entirely as warriors, leaders, and physically intimidating presences. Mateo has none of that on the page. Sheridan's direction to him, as recounted by Encyclopedia.com citing Entertainment Weekly, was just 2 words: think dignity. I wanted to get that spiritual aspect. And what Hounsou does with that note is build the most emotionally vulnerable performance of his entire filmography out of a character who is dying, alone, and quietly terrified of being remembered as the angry man behind the door. The first time the door opens, the entire film recalibrates. The little girls are dressed for Halloween, they knock, and instead of the rage everyone expects, Mateo is gentle, soft-spoken, almost startled by their presence. He answers the door, looks at the costumes, and finally cracks his only line in the doorway.
Is this Halloween?
Yeah.
Where are you from?
And then he hands them a jar full of every coin he has in the apartment. It's the most disarming reveal in the entire movie, because Hounsou is playing a man who hasn't had visitors in months, possibly years, and is using 2 children to remember how to be tender. The youngest sister, Ariel, looks up at him later when they're sitting at the dinner table together, and she says very quietly,
You're magic, you're winning everything.
Hounsou plays the rest of the role at that exact register, this controlled stillness that makes every interaction feel like he's protecting them from something he's already accepted about himself. The scene that earned him the Oscar nomination is the confrontation between Mateo and the father, Johnny, late in the film, where Mateo finally tells him what's killing him and what he has been quietly trying to give the family in return for being let into their lives.
I'm in love with you. And I'm in love with your beautiful woman. And I'm in love with your kids. And I'm even in love with your unborn child. I'm even in love with your anger. I'm in love with anything that lives.
The film earned 3 Oscar nominations, including Best Original Screenplay for the Sheridans, Best Actress for Samantha Morton, and Best Supporting Actor for Hounsou, his first nomination. He won the Independent Spirit Award for Best Supporting Male the same year. The Phoenix Film Festival's reviewer wrote that Hounsou played Mateo as a loose cannon, a wild card, and a gentle soul, all at once, which is the entire trick of the performance. He's 3 different men in the same scene, and somehow none of them feel performed. There's also a quote from Shia LaBeouf, who worked with Hounsou on Constantine that same year, that I think captures the off-screen reality of why directors keep coming back to him. Speaking to Variety around the time of his Oscar nomination, LaBeouf said, "Intensity is at an all-time high with him. He has this booming voice, and that's the side of him you fear. He has a lot of pain to draw from, and it elevates him. When you have Djimon in your movie, you know it won't be a bad film because he ups everyone's game." That's a co-star describing the entire underrated thesis from inside the room.
My family's here in Guinea.
Yes, according to the manifest.
I do not know how to thank you.
Blood Diamond is a 2006 Edward Zwick film set during the Sierra Leone Civil War of the late 90s. And on paper, it's a Leonardo DiCaprio movie. He plays Danny Archer, a South African mercenary smuggling conflict diamonds out of the country, with Jennifer Connelly as Maddie Bowen, an American journalist trying to expose the trade. DiCaprio got the Best Actor Oscar nomination, his accent work got most of the press coverage, and the marketing was built around him almost entirely. But the film itself is structured around Hounsou's character, a Mendi fisherman named Solomon Vandy, who watches the rebels burn his village, separate him from his family, and force him into the diamond fields, where he discovers and hides a massive pink stone that becomes the engine of the entire plot. Edward Zwick was very specific about why he cast Hounsou over a more bankable name. He told Backstage, "Djimon's work has been so extraordinary in smaller parts these last several years, in films like In America. He's a West African man, and the idea of casting a West African man as a West African was particularly interesting. There are things he understands and brings intuitively to the part that I don't think could have been captured by anyone else." That's the director of the movie telling you the lead supporting actor was the one piece of casting the entire film couldn't have worked without. In the same Backstage interview, Wick also gave a description of working with him on set that should be quoted every time someone questions Hounsou's professionalism. He recalled filming a key sequence where Hounsou had to physically carry DiCaprio up a cliff. "I had him do it take after take because the light was getting more and more beautiful. He just kept giving his all, and I finally said, 'Djimon, you have to carry him a bit slower and make it look harder, because you make it look easy. He's so strong and determined, it didn't matter that his legs were burning and destroyed the next day.'" That's a director openly admitting his lead supporting actor was making physical labor look so effortless on camera that it was undermining the dramatic stakes. They had to ask him to underperform. The first long scene between Hounsou and DiCaprio sets the entire tonal contract of the film. Archer is needling, hustling, working every angle, and Solomon is just refusing to engage with any of it because he doesn't care about the diamond, he cares about his son. The exchange where Archer asks him what he does for a living, and Solomon answers with one word, is doing a tremendous amount of work in 3 syllables. That's the entire performance compressed into a single line. Solomon isn't trying to be clever or dismissive, he's literally a fisherman. And the deadpan honesty of the answer tells you exactly how this man is going to navigate every con DiCaprio's character throws at him for the next 2 hours. Later in that same act, when Archer is trying to get him to flip on his moral framework about the diamond, Solomon delivers the line that anchors the entire ethical argument of the film without the writers having to spell it out.
I understand why people want our diamonds, yes. But how can my own people do this to each other?
And then there's the scene that broke a lot of people watching this movie in theaters in 2006, the moment near the end where Solomon finds his son Dia, who has been radicalized into a child soldier by the RUF. Dia doesn't recognize him. He has a gun pointed at his own father, and Solomon doesn't argue, doesn't beg, doesn't try to physically take the weapon. He just talks, quietly, naming the boy back into existence.
They made you do bad things. You're not a bad boy. I am your father, who loves you, and you will come home with me and be my son again.
That speech is the emotional climax of a $100 million war movie, and Hounsou plays it without a single rehearsed beat in his voice. His hands are shaking. He's almost out of breath. The Hollywood Reporter's original review wrote that Hounsou's depth surpasses the two-dimensional conception of his role, and that the film's emotional pulse only really arrived in the second half when the action stripped away to focus on the two leads. That's a generous way of saying the entire film actually belongs to him. He earned his second Best Supporting Actor Oscar nomination for it. He won the National Board of Review for Best Supporting Actor in the NAACP Image Award. He didn't win the Oscar. This is also the role where Hounsou himself has gone on the record about feeling structurally cheated. He told The Guardian he felt seriously cheated that he was placed in the supporting category for a movie that was structurally his story, while DiCaprio got the lead nomination. And he's not wrong. Look at the film. Walk through the plot, the narrative engine, the emotional through line, the scene that sells the political stakes, all of it is Solomon Vandy's. That's the thesis of the underrated argument right there.
Last night. Must have been Satan's stomach growling.
You're the one soul he'd come up here himself to collect.
Quick detour to 2005 because Hounsou's work as Papa Midnight in Constantine is the cleanest example of him doing 5 minutes of supporting work that other actors would need a full film to land. He plays a former voodoo witch doctor who runs a nightclub that operates as neutral ground between heaven and hell, and what makes the performance stick is how completely unimpressed he plays the character against everything happening around him. He's not on Constantine's side, he's not on the demon's side, he's on the side of his own neutrality, and Hounsou anchors the entire scene with this stillness that tells you, without saying it, that Midnight has seen things bigger than this fight before. And then in 2014, he showed up as Koreth the Pursuer in Guardians of the Galaxy, which is the role that proves he can do comic timing with the same precision he brings to a Spielberg drama. The opening scene where Chris Pratt's Star-Lord tries to introduce himself with the swagger of a legendary outlaw works entirely because Hounsou refuses to play along with the joke, delivering complete deadpan confusion while the comedy happens to him instead of through him. He went on to reprise Koreth in Captain Marvel 5 years later, which means the same actor who carried the emotional climax of Blood Diamond is also responsible for one of the most quoted comic beats in MCU history, and that range almost never gets credited as range. I want to close on A Quiet Place Day 1 because it's the most recent receipt I can put in front of you, and it shows that almost 3 decades into the career, the work is still operating at the same level the industry keeps undervaluing. The film is a 2024 prequel directed by Michael Sarnowski, set on the first day of the alien invasion that drives the rest of the franchise. Lupita Nyong'o is the lead, playing a hospice patient named Sam, who happens to be in Manhattan when the creatures arrive. Joseph Quinn plays Eric, a British law student she encounters in the chaos. And Hounsou reprises Henry, the Silent Island survivor he originally played briefly in A Quiet Place Part 2 in 2020. The thing about Henry that makes this role a perfect closer for the video is that the entire concept of the franchise is sound-based survival, which means the actors are working in near total silence for most of the runtime. Hounsou has maybe a handful of audible lines in the entire movie. He's communicating fear, leadership, exhaustion, and tenderness using nothing but his face, his hands, and his physical presence in the frame. The single line he delivers to Joseph Quinn's character after dragging him out of the water with the cat in his arms is also the entire emotional architecture of his appearance in the film. 2 words. Hounsou plays them with the weight of a man who doesn't actually believe anyone is safe anymore, but is willing to lie about it for the kid in front of him. The other moment most reviewers picked up on is the early scene in the puppet theater where a fellow survivor begins to panic. In that scene, Henry makes a snap decision to keep the man quiet that ends with the man dead. And Hounsou plays the entire thing without dialogue. You watch his face cycle through calculation, regret, and the pure terror of having just become a different kind of person under those rules of survival, all while making no sound at all. RogerEbert.com singled it out specifically, writing that he gets one of the best scenes in the movie as a man goes into a panic attack in front of him and his son. What would you do? How far would you go to silence a man who might put your family in jeopardy? Would you kill him? The film grossed $262 million worldwide on a $67 million budget. Hounsou continues to be cast because directors know exactly what he brings, and Hollywood continues to underpay him because the structural problem hasn't changed. About 6 months after this film came out, in January of 2025, Hounsou sat down with CNN's Larry Meadowo and said something that should be the closing argument of any video about underrated actors. "I'm still struggling to make a living. I've been in this business making films now for over 2 decades, with 2 Oscar nominations, been in many big blockbuster films, and yet I'm still struggling financially. I'm definitely underpaid." When Meadowo called that mind-boggling because Hounsou is one of the first big black actors he saw growing up in big-budget films, Hounsou's reply was quoted by HuffPost. "Well, that's a sign for you that systemic racism is not something you can deal with lightly. You have to cope with it and survive the best way you can." And he's not even being theatrical about it. He told The Guardian in 2023 that he had yet to meet the film that paid me fairly, and that he had come up in the business with people who had a fraction of his accolades and were vastly more wealthy than he was. That's the actor of Cinqué, Juba, Mateo, and Solomon Vandy, telling you that 30 years of nominated work has not bought him what an average run on a single sitcom would buy somebody else. What connects all of these performances is something I think gets lost when people talk about Hounsou's career, which is that he is one of the only working actors who can carry a film entirely through silence and physical presence. And then, in the next role, deliver dialogue in a language he learned in 10 days. And then, in the role after that, play a dying artist with the softness of a chamber piece. That's not a type. That's not a niche. That's range. And the reason it doesn't get described as range is that the industry has spent 30 years describing him with one word, and that word is usually some variation of imposing. Critics writing about him in the 2000s repeatedly called the parts he played the noble savage, which is a phrase that says more about the critics than the actor, and the result was that every script that came in after Amistad asked him to be physically magnificent first and emotionally intelligent second, when his actual gift is the reverse. Look at the list. Cinqué isn't a warrior. He's a kidnapped father trying to prove he is a person under property law. Juba isn't a fighter. He's the spiritual conscience of a revenge story. Mateo isn't a presence. He's a man dying alone in a building of strangers who decide to love him. Solomon Vandy isn't a partner in a buddy thriller. He's a fisherman trying to get his son back from people who have turned the boy into a weapon. Henry isn't a survivor. He's the man who has to make impossible decisions about strangers' lives without speaking. Hounsou plays every single one of these parts at a register that should have built him a career equivalent to Denzel or Idris or Forrest Whitaker, and the gap between the work and the recognition is the entire underrated thesis. You can hand this man any kind of material from any genre, and he will lift it. The problem is the industry kept handing him the same kind of material, and even when he transcended it, the institutional response was to nominate him, not pay him, and then go cast him as a generic warlord in the next 4 films he showed up in. He started a production company called Fanaticus Media Group. He directed a documentary about voodoo traditions in Benin. He opened the UN General Assembly in 2009 with a speech about climate change in developing nations. He founded the Djimon Hounsou Foundation, which organizes a memorial run in Richmond commemorating the journey of the first enslaved Africans brought to North America. None of that is the work of an actor coasting on type. That's the work of someone who has spent his entire career trying to redirect the cultural attention his performances earn him toward the continent he came from, and the industry's answer has been to keep paying him supporting actor rates. The thing that genuinely gets me about his career is that the receipts don't lie. Roger Ebert praised him, Janet Maslin praised him, Edward Zwick said the role couldn't have been played by anyone else. Steven Spielberg waited 2 years for the right actor and pulled him out of a stack of 150. Anthony Hopkins cried after their scene together. Shia LaBeouf publicly said he raises the floor of every film he's in. He has an Independent Spirit Award, a National Board of Review win, 2 Oscar nominations, a Golden Globe nomination, and multiple SAG nominations. And the man currently telling reporters he's underpaid and is the same man whose audition tape made one of the most powerful directors alive and a global casting search. That's the disconnect we should actually be talking about when we talk about who Hollywood considers a leading man. Because by every meaningful metric of craft, Djimon Hounsou should have been one for the past 28 years. All right, that's it for this one. Let me know in the comments which Hounsou performance hits hardest for you, and if the only thing you've seen him in is Guardians of the Galaxy or one of the Marvel projects, go put on In America tonight. It's 90 minutes long, you'll cry at least twice, and you'll come out of it understanding why this is the best living example of an underrated actor working in Hollywood right now.